Well, a very warm welcome to a brand new edition of To The Point with me, Frank Pereira, on Rajya Sabha Television. Well, the budget session of Parliament is just around the corner, and there are several crucial states that go to polls in a couple of months from now. And also to talk about what's happening in Bihar, I have with me on the program this week Mr. Pavan Varma of the JDU. Mr. Varma, welcome and thank you for joining us on Rajya Sabha Television.
Pleasure.
First, let's talk about the budget session of Parliament. You know, it's going to happen probably in a couple of weeks' time. 23rd is the date that everyone is talking about. We'll probably know in a couple of days when the budget session will indeed start. But the question on everyone's mind is, will the House function as it's supposed to function normally?
Well, I would like the House to function. There are important bills, a great deal of pending legislative agenda, and certainly the GST Bill. So we would like the House to function, but I have said this and I don't want to repeat it as a cliche. The primary responsibility of running the House is that of the Treasury benches. Why do I say this? We have the budget session and the date is known. I should have thought that negotiations on critical bills like the GST should have begun in all seriousness in a structured manner before the session, so that the three outstanding points are resolved. I would have also thought that there should be a far greater outreach with the opposition in building a consensus on what is doable.
So that's not happening, is what you're
I
saying.
don't believe that outreach is there. I don't believe that the Treasury benches are making a concerted effort to reach out to the opposition to find a negotiated solution to areas where there are differences. In addition, there are some very inflammable issues on which the government has to be answerable, and Parliament is the one forum where you can ask for accountability.
And what are these issues?
For instance, what has happened on the Hyderabad University campus. It's a very worrying trend. Also, what has happened in Arunachal Pradesh. This is a matter that is of deep concern. Right in Delhi, you have a situation where students were brutally beaten up. Now, these issues will be taken up in Parliament. It all depends on how the Treasury bench responds. If they say, my way or the highway, then of course it becomes difficult for Parliament to function. But let me reiterate to you, as far as I am concerned, as far as the JDU is concerned, we have always believed that Parliament should function, and the disruption of Parliament is, from our point of view, an unedifying spectacle, even though the current ruling party had made a virtue of it and even given an ideological endorsement of such tactics.
You know, you said that the onus lies on the Treasury benches to allow the House to function. But then if you speak to the government says that they have been reaching out, they've been doing everything possible to try and allow the House to function. But it's the opposition, a combined opposition, which is not allowing the House to function.
Well, there will always be two sides to a wall. Their point of view and our point of view. But I think some of what these claims are saying are open to verifiable scrutiny. If the Treasury benches are reaching out, surely it need not be so camouflaged that leading members of the opposition are unaware of it. Yes, in the last session, the Prime Minister, midway through the session, did invite the leader of the Congress party and her colleagues for a cup of tea. That was a gracious gesture. But I think it did not have adequate follow-up. In fact, it is a gesture that should have been made much earlier. And so the divides continue. Now, it is the government which needs to be proactive on the legislative agenda. And let me be honest with you. In a democracy, the opposition is there not to rubber stamp the government's legislative agenda. It is there to also ask questions. It is also there to point out that we have reservations on some issues. And it is mythology to believe that the opposition blindly opposes. I know that in previous sessions, we have passed over 36 bills, including those bills such as the Mines and Minerals Bill and others where we had reservations. We had reservations, but we went through with what we believed to be a less than perfect bill which was good for the country. So we are willing to cooperate, but it's a matter of perception. Our feeling is that this government does not reach out. I remember that it's an apocryphal story, but so many people have told me that I believe it must be true. Mr. Pranab Mukherjee, when he was the leader of the House in the Raj Sabha, used to tell the Minister of Parliamentary Affairs that I will judge you not by the time you spend on our side of the House, but by the amount of time you spend on the opposite side of the House, in order to reach out. I think this is something which this government has not yet mastered the art of.
You know, I saw visible change in the approach of the government after the loss in Bihar that the BJP was dealt. We saw that the BJP was trying to be a little more accommodative, was indeed reaching out to members of the opposition. But you're saying that's not enough. You're saying that more needs to be done. Is there a visible change on the ground, or is it just, on the outside?
Let me make the difference. There should have been visible change. I'm afraid we are not seeing enough of that change. What has changed? Till recently, the finance minister has reiterated the gulf on the GST bill, and in the last session of parliament, which was after the Bihar assembly elections, he began on the eve of parliament by calling the suggestions being made by the opposition as preposterous. That certainly is not a good beginning to have a negotiated solution.
Indeed. Talking about the GST bill, what's your party's stand as far as the GST bill is concerned?
See, we are a consuming state, Bihar. We would be happy for the GST bill to be passed. We have supported it all along. In fact, when the BJP was in opposition, it held up the bill for a couple of years, primarily due to the opposition of some of their chief ministers, including one who happens to be the Prime Minister today. It was they who held it up. Now that the bill has come up again with the support of the BJP, in fact they are introducing it, we support the bill. But equally we believe that if there are 2 or 3 points, whether it's on entry tax or on the cap or on the arbitration council, I believe these are negotiated, easily negotiable points of difference, provided there is application of mind, sincere effort to bridge the gap. I don't see that happening.
In the interest of the country, then, shouldn't the opposition and the government come together and ensure that there's some consensus reached at least on some of these issues, and then in the interest of the country?
I entirely agree with you. But to clap, you need 2 hands. And in my view, I could be wrong, there have been several instances where the government has to be more proactive to reach what I consider to be, or you are speaking of, a consensus. If that proactiveness is not there, then parliament sessions are wasted. I am against the mindless disruption of parliament.
It looks like that's where it's headed this time around.
I have myself never ever gone into the well of the House, and I don't believe that today tit for tat politics, where since the BJP perfected the art of disrupting parliament over 5 years, the opposition must do it now. I believe the interests of the nation are above this. In fact, I often say that in its entire history, the House of Commons was not been adjourned for a single day.
Yes.
And soon we will have a record that there is not a single day when our House is not adjourned. So that is the kind of difference we are talking about. There should be civilized debate.
We hope we don't go there, but as far as the budget session is concerned, do you see it going down that line? Because of the several issues
let me say to you that on some issues, and now Arunachal, for instance, let me give you an example. Arunachal is sub judice, it is before the Supreme Court. We may have a ruling prior to when Parliament meets. But on Arunachal, we raised the manner in which, in our view, the governor, through completely extra constitutional means, acting in a transparently partisan manner, sought to destabilize a legitimate government. We raised it in Parliament. I thought that on such an issue, the treasury benches would have seen a consensus. The governor cannot convene an assembly without the advice of the duly constituted chief minister, then endorse the holding of the assembly in a community hall, and then hold it in a hotel in order to impeach a speaker and appoint a deputy speaker with a rump, then deciding who the next chief minister is. It is a complete mockery of the constitution. I would have thought, in order to build consensus, the treasury benches would have said, yes, what you have pointed out is an example of the misuse of powers of a constitutional authority. We will go into it, we will find out the facts, report to Parliament. Let me give you another example. What is happening in Hyderabad today? We believe that while an inquiry has been set up, the role of the Ministry of HRD in the running of autonomous institutions like universities, including in the choice of who should be vice chancellors and in appointments, is a very serious issue. And often merit is being sacrificed in order to select people who have a certain ideological point of view. It's dangerous for the country. It is interfering with educational freedom. And I believe the autonomy of university campuses. Now, if we raise the issue, and if the government's response is, we have ordered an inquiry, those who are guilty will be punished, we are inquiring into the role of the Ministry of HRD, and we are doing our best in order not to have this divide between Dalit, poor and backward students, and what I believe is a student wing of the ruling party which is beyond control, or for instance biased leaderships of the faculty in university. Now you can find a consensus. I will give you a third example. There was an occasion when a BJP minister made a public comment which created national outrage. I won't repeat it, but it was about Ramzadas. Naturally, in Parliament, when it's in session, this outrage will find a voice. It took 2 days for the disruption of Parliament before the Prime Minister could come and give an explanation for the completely unacceptable remarks of a minister and his own council of ministers. And that too a reply which was reluctant, half-hearted, and from our point of view inadequate, but we accepted it in order to enable Parliament to run. So these are the kind of situations which, if it doesn't become a prestige issue, then you can build bridges and then you can ensure that Parliament runs in the larger interests of the country.
Indeed. On that note, then the onus lies on the government, and it is for the government to let the House to function. We'll slip into a short break. On the other side, we'll talk about some of the states that go to polls this year, as well as what's happening in Bihar. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're watching Rajya Sabha Television in conversation with Mr. Pavan Varma, Rajya Sabha MP of the JDU. Mr. Varma, let's talk about the elections, of course. 5 crucial states, or rather 3 crucial states, then there's Puducherry and Assam as well. So, what are your party's chances? I know that, your party leader has spoken very keenly about Uttar Pradesh and forming a grand alliance of sorts, the same kind of alliance that you formed in Bihar, in Uttar Pradesh. Is that fructifying? Is that something that you're considering seriously?
I think what Mr. Nitish Kumar has said needs to be seen in perspective. What was the inference to be drawn from what happened in Bihar? I think the one overriding lesson to be learned from Bihar, from our point of view, was that when forces which are for a different narrative of politics, good governance, economic growth with social justice, religious and social harmony, if such forces come together in a planned, systematic manner, then you can win and defeat the ruling party and its allies. That is the lesson from Bihar. And it required a change in mindset. For instance, I think apart from the RJD and the JDU, the Congress was a gainer. The Congress, with great maturity and wisdom, agreed to join an alliance where it was, in the number of seats allocated to it, a junior partner. But by joining hands with a larger coalition, it managed to increase the number of seats it has by 6 times and 7 times almost. This experiment in a planned, systematic manner with an ideological matrix to it, we have to see how far it's replicable in other states. That is what was, I think, Mr. Nitish Kumar's message.
You know, Uttar Pradesh goes to polls in 2017, but is there something that you're expecting out of Uttar Pradesh? Is the JDU keenly looking at Uttar Pradesh? And that's why you've already started speaking about Uttar Pradesh 1 year before the polls.
No, the JDU is naturally looking keenly, although we are largely a party confined to Bihar, but Mr. Nitish Kumar certainly has a national perspective in terms of an alternative paradigm to politics.
You know, I'm just going to cut you short there because there's something else that came to my mind when you said that, you know, when the JDU, RJD and of course the Congress won in Bihar a few months ago, everyone said it's going to be Nitish versus Modi 2019. Is that what's going to happen?
I don't believe it is something we can speak of today, nor is it necessary that it's a corollary of the Bihar victory. But all I can say is that Mr. Nitish Kumar, for his administrative competence and capabilities of governance, and for his ability to articulate an alternative paradigm of politics, which I believe is in greater consonance with the overall good of the nation, he's transformed Bihar. For 5 years in a row, Bihar had the highest growth rates of any state in a country. In fact, last year, it notched 17% growth. Now he's working 16 hours a day to implement his promises before the polls, which include, ambitiously enough, I want to mention to you, quite apart from, you know, manifestos are written and then left unread. But the 7-point program that he has, which promises to bring electricity not only to every village but to every human habitation, piped water to every human habitation, roads to every village, including pakka roads within the village and pakka nalis, toilets to every home, etc., apart from programs for women and for youth. Now, he is working on the time-bound implementation of a very ambitious agenda of governance. So, obviously, Mr. Nitish Kumar's respect across the nation is there for his achievements and I think also for his thinking on political issues in the country. I had very briefly enumerated them, which I think constitute the core of his thought process. Good governance. Today, there can be no politics without good governance, but good governance that goes beyond slogans, which if it says it will do something, does it in a manifestable, deliverable manner. Economic growth, but not just economic growth. In a country like ours with such vast socio-economic discrepancies, you must have economic growth which also yields dividends for the poorest of the poor, the marginalized, the oppressed. So, economic growth with justice, Nyay Sangat Vikas, as he puts it. And thirdly, of course, religious and social harmony. In a country like ours, again, good governance and religious and social harmony are two sides of the same coin. You can't have one without the other. We are a plural, multicultural, multi-religious, composite country where we need what I say often in Hindi, bhaichara, mohabbat, pyar, sohard. That is the way this country can run. So it's an alternative paradigm of politics for which I think he enjoys nationwide respect. It's too premature to talk of 2019.
Let's talk about Bihar then, because, you know, the BJP has time and again been bringing up this point, stating that the super chief minister of Bihar is Lalu Prasad Yadav and not Nitish Kumar. It is Lalu that is running the government in Bihar.
I can
It's
do.
not I who's saying this. It's the BJP who's time and again said this.
In fact, I would expect you as an objective person not to say it, but I would expect the BJP to say it because it's in opposition in Bihar and is certainly short of issues to take up. But let's take up this particular criticism. Mr. Lalu Prasad is not in government. He cannot be chief minister nor can he stand for elections until his case is disposed of. My knowledge is that Mr. Lalu Prasad is not interfering in the running of the government, and with a chief minister like Nitish Kumar, and Mr. Nitish Kumar and Lalu Prasad have been comrades in the past in spite of the acrimony in between. I don't believe he needs to. But I'll say the opposite as well. He is a mass leader. He's been chief minister for 15 years. Hundreds of people meet him every day. If he comes across a case where he believes injustice has been done or a matter is long pending, as a public figure and a politician, he can certainly speak to those who are in positions of authority to get this matter resolved. Not for personal gain, not for corruption, not for any ulterior reason, but because that case deserves to be expedited. I tell you, I'm in politics and also I was earlier in the foreign service. So many people speak to me, for instance, about a delayed passport. I will call up somebody to say, look, 3 months they haven't got a reply, can you do something? This is not interference. In any case, I am not in a situation of interfering. So I believe the BJP is using a non-issue in order to create deliberately a distorted perception of Mr. Lalu Prasad's role, but I don't believe it reflects the truth. The same thing is happening on the law and order situation. If you take the NCRB statistics, National Crime Records,
Yes.
which is not our body, it's a central authority. The per capita rate of crime in Bihar is much lower than that of BJP ruled states, including Delhi, where the police is under the Union Home Ministry. But today the situation is that if almost to caricature it, if there is an accident between a tractor and a motorcycle, the BJP says, Jungle Raj. In a state where there are 10 crore people, if Bihar was a country, it would be the 12th largest nation in the world. 10 crore people. There will be the occasional instance of crime. But the BJP appears to be almost waiting for that crime to happen, of any kind. To amplify it and say, Jungle Raj is back.
So
Actually, Mr. Nitish Kumar has kept the Home Ministry under him. In fact, one of his greatest achievements in 2005 when he came to power was the restoration of law and order. He is not the one to compromise on this issue. Let me say that 3 months before the Bihar elections, he put 2 of his own MLAs in jail, and they were influential MLAs. So I don't believe that criticism or the one of Mr. Lalu Prasad's interference holds any water, but I can understand why the BJP is pushing for it, because they have been almost politically obliterated from the state and they need to cling to some issues.
Talking about development, because you yourself brought development up, one of the major criticisms is that, development, especially on the Ganges, has not been happening as it was supposed to happen, because, it's the bridges that really connect North and South Bihar. So what's happening on that front, and how are we going to see a speeding up of development in Bihar?
Well, I don't know what you mean by speeding up of development unless we lose control of the accelerator. As I mentioned to you, for several years consecutively, Bihar had by far the highest growth rate of the country. And in particular, when you mention bridges, I would wager an estimation that no other state has built as many bridges as has Bihar during the tenure of Mr. Nitish Kumar. Small, medium and very large bridges. But development is not instant coffee. It requires sustained effort, it requires finances, it requires the time gestation, it requires planning, and I can assure you all of that is being taken care of. In fact, in terms of the number of kilometers of roads and in terms of the number of bridges, including pulias, I think Bihar has set some kind of a national record.
All right, and before I let you go, of course, because we're completely out of time, finally, since the budget session is just around the corner, one final question on the budget session, and what is it that you expect from the finance minister's budget itself this time around? Do you expect it to be a populist budget?
I don't, let me say, I hope it's not a populist budget, but I will say that I would like to see a budget which is not so elitist, where the imagination of the budget is not crowded only by bullet trains, national highways, industrial corridors, all of which are good things, but which also has a social sensitivity to the much larger number of people in India who live off agriculture and irrigation. So a budget which has a sense of social justice is what I would look for.
All right, we'll all have to wait and see which way the budget goes. Of course, thank you so much, Mr. Varma, for joining us on the program and putting things into perspective for us. That's all the time we have. Thank you so much for watching. See you again next time.